Hey there, pod racing people. I'm making this video to go over a brand new feature for Botto that is specific to tournaments. So if you've ever played a tournament with us in the past, before the tournament starts, the tournament admins will release a set of rules that tell you what you can or can't do within a match, what bans you have, what forces you can use, and salty runbacks, stuff like that. So what this feature is a condensed way to make something like that, but with a bunch of options to choose from. And it's called Rulesets. So to access this, all you have to do is type /tourney rulesets, and it will pop up with this manager here. So if we click on this select here, we can see all the different rule sets that have been used in past tournaments. So if we click on this year's rule set, we can see all the options that are available within this type of match. So in our best of 9, we're playing to 5. These are our default conditions for the match. We can choose any track for the first track. That is determined by process of elimination. Then we'll have 2 track permabans after the first track. And then before each race, we'll have 1 pod temp ban from the loser, 1 track temp ban from the winner, and then the loser gets to pick the track. We also have 1 salty runback per match from each player, as well as 3 conditions or forces that you can use, that the loser gets to use, and these are the options available for that. So this is just one example of the 1v1 rule set, and there are currently 3 that can be created with this manager, and you can see that by the little emojis here. Of course, there is the qualifier from this year. You can see we have each race, each track for each race, and the conditions, what pod you can use, the time limit you have, and the penalty time if you fail to achieve a time. So this tool allows you to basically save and edit and manage all these different types of rule sets, and eventually the plan is to allow you to play these rule sets and have Botto kinda guide you through these and help you along the way with all these different options. What I would really like to get out of making this video is your guys' feedback on what options you'd like to see in this rule set creator, as well as what needs to be clarified more, or what needs to be worded better. So I hope I can get your guys' feedback on all that. So now I'll go ahead and show you guys how to create your own rule set using this tool. So we can click this new button down here to start from scratch, or we can select one of these existing rule sets and clone it and then modify it to what we want. But for now, I'm just going to click new, and it'll pop out with this ephemeral message that only you can see. So no one else will see you creating a rule set, so you don't have to worry about that. But from here, we can go ahead and select what type of rule set we want to create, and you can see there's already 3 types to choose from. And maybe you guys will have suggestions for other types of rule sets. These are just based off of what we have already seen in past tournaments, but perhaps in the future we might see maybe a team type rule set, like a 2v2 format, or maybe even a battle royale, or some weird type of thing with upgrades. Who knows? I'll leave that to you guys to sort of brainstorm and come up with. But for now, I'll just show off what we have available right now. Now, the most complex rule set by far is the 1v1, because you can get really creative with the sort of interplay between each player and the ban system and how things sort of play out in a 1v1 scenario. But when it comes to 1v all and Qualifier, you're much more limited by all the players that play through this sort of have to go through the same track and same conditions as all the other players. You can't really have that dynamic interplay. So I'll start off with that since it's more simple. So let's do the 1v all, which you can see here is based off the David Stubbs Tribute Tournament. In that tournament, they just went through all the amateur circuit tracks, and you can see for each track it was max upgrades, full track, and 3 laps, and you could select any pod. But if we create our own, it basically defaults to that initially, but we can go through and start changing some of these settings using this top select right here. So in our general settings, we have the number of races we can change. You can see there's a minimum of 3, maximum of 14. So let's say we wanted to make a rule set based off the invitational tracks. So we would select 4 races. We also have this option here, which is our pod selection method. Right now there are 4 options here. The player's pick is what we are familiar with, where the player can pick any pod they want, but if you wanted to, you can also limit their choice down to a specific set of pods, or you could limit how many uses they get of each pod with the pod pool option. And then there's also the track favorite option, which obviously you just have to play the track favorite of each track. So we'll stick with player pick, and now you see we can access all the race options. So here we have race 1, which, like I said, we're going to invitational. We'll be on Ando Prime Centrum, and we can also select the conditions that we want to apply to this specific race. We could also limit what pods are available for this race. So as you can see, for each race, you could drill down and get really creative with what each rule set looks like and what options are available. So let's go ahead and finish this out. Race 2 will be on Abyss, and hell, let's have it be a skips track. And then race 3 will be the Gauntlet, and that'll be mirrored. And then race 4, Inferno. Let's say you don't get to play Ben on Inferno. So here you see we have all our options lined up here. Ando Prime Centrum with the default conditions. Abyss, but it skips. The Gauntlet, but it's mirrored. Inferno, but there's no Ben. So as you can see, you can get really creative with what happens in a rule set just based off of the most simplest type so far, but it gets even crazier. So after we're done with a rule set, we can go ahead and click this finalize option, which is where we get to name and save it. So this is our default name, but we want to rename this to something clever. So we click this rename option, and then it tells us to go ahead and send it in the chat. So we'll name this something like Weird Invitational Circuit. And then we send that, and you can see it pops up right there. And when we're done, we click save. And it tells us that we have successfully saved Weird Invitational Circuit to Rulesets. So we can dismiss this. We come back here, we click refresh, and there it is. And we can view it, and we can see those same options that we set up before. And since we are the author of this rule set, we can also go back and edit it in case we noticed Oh wait, I didn't mean to put the gauntlet mirrored, and we can go back and fix that. And then we can save it again and refresh. And there you see that it is no longer mirrored. And if we really hate this, we think, okay, why did I create this dumb rule set? We can go ahead and delete it as well, and it'll be gone. So the only difference between this 1v all rule set and the qualifier rule set is with the qualifier rule set, you add a time limit and a penalty time. That's really the only difference. So when it comes to adding those options, you just click these buttons down here under each race, and then you enter, say you want 12 minutes for this one, and it'll update eventually. So that's how you set that. And if you want to abandon a rule set in the middle, you can just dismiss it, you know. So now let's get into the most complicated type of rule set, which is our 1v1 rule set. So off the bat, it doesn't look that bad. But if you start going through the options, it can get pretty wild with how you can combine everything that's available right now, and perhaps there might be more options available in the future. So the options that I've added in right now are really just based off of what we have done these past 3 years, but there's also logical extensions of each option. So you'll see as we get into it how that will all work. So first of all, in our general settings, we have access to our win condition, default conditions, and gentleman's agreement options. So right off the bat with our win conditions, it's already getting a little weird with the wording here, 5 wins max. If no other condition is met, first to 5 wins the match. So this specific wording is going to be different than 5 wins minimum. In addition to other conditions, at least 5 is required to win. So why is it like that? That's because there are also wins in a row options and win by options. So you can actually select multiple of these, and depending on the max or minimum option will determine how the win condition is applied in a match. So for instance, if we select the win by 2 option, and then we also say 4 wins minimum, this is very similar to what you would see in a tennis match, where a player must get 4 wins minimum, but they also have to win by 2. So for example, if the opponent has 3 points and you have 4 points, you have to get to 5 points to actually win the match. Whereas if we had this same thing with 4 wins maximum, that means as soon as you win by 2, you win the match. So let's say if your opponent never scores, they still have a point score of 0, and you get to 2, you win the match. So the match is essentially cut short. So that is the distinction there with the win condition. Next, with the default conditions, we have basically all the standard options in the game. I don't know if we're ever really going to stray from 3 laps, but you never know. I'm just going to throw the options in there. Then we also have skips, no upgrades mirrored. But this just basically says what each track in the 1v1 defaults to. And then we have our gentleman's agreement option. Of course we want to allow this, but you never know. You might want to disallow it. Next, let's check out the first track options. So the method here is how we arrive at our first track. And then we can also sort of subdivide what tracks are available for the first pick. So for instance, in the 20th anniversary tournament, we only allowed the amateur circuit tracks to be selected in the first track. But we also have these options here. So this is the one we're familiar with. It's the process of elimination, where after a chance cube, each player alternates bands until one track is left. We also have a chance cube option, where after that initial chance cube, it's basically just whoever wins that gets to pick the first track. So it kind of accelerates that process. Then I also added these two options, which are based on your ELO rating. So for example, if someone has a lower ELO rating, they would automatically get to pick the first track, or a higher rating. I don't know if you would really want to do that. And then we have a complete random option, which would be available with Botto guiding you through this rule set, because he would be able to randomize it on the spot for you. Next, let's move on to the permabands. So we're only familiar with track permabands so far, but you can see I've added in pod permabands and condition permabands, which could get really interesting. So for each permaband, we have these same options. Player pick is what we're familiar with, where each player gets to pick a band, and then we can specify how many they get per match. So let's say in this example, each player gets one pod to permaban, which would be interesting. There's also this earned via win and earned via loss option, which places a lot more importance on winning the first track. So that could have consequences throughout the rest of the match if you were to select this option. So if we say earn via win, this is only available to the winner of the first race. So that could be interesting. And then we have an either or option. So for this to work, you need to basically combine it with another permaban, where the player gets to decide between using, for example, one pod permaban, or if we set it up in the track permaban, 2 track permabands. So here you see that together, either or, 1 permaban or 2 track bands. So that is their decision to make at that point. Then we have, let's say, a random condition is banned. So this could throw a wrench into the match if, say, you were planning on using skips or a pod ban to your advantage, but now it's randomly banned. And this would avoid the default conditions. It wouldn't ban a default condition, but if there was ever like forces to use in a match, this would apply there. But it's really up to you to design it in a way that makes sense. So let's move on to the temp bands. So just like the perma bands, we have the same temp bands. Now you might be wondering, okay, why call this condition instead of, because that sounds like forces. So I know we've been calling it forces for the options you have to apply to a track, such as your skips and no upgrades and pod ban. But I think the wording for condition makes a little more sense, especially when we're talking about permaban or temp ban. So it's like you're banning a force. So I didn't really like the wording of like banning a force. It didn't really make sense, but maybe someone will have a better suggestion for that. So anyway, the temp ban options. So we're familiar with the sort of flow of the loser getting to set the pod temp ban, and then we have these two options here where you can actually go in and say maybe they have more to use per race, but also you can limit it by match. So say they only get like 3 temp bands to use, pod temp bands to use per match. So that introduces another layer of strategy to where they have to decide whether or not they should use this band at this moment, and so on. You also saw here we have an extension of that where it's a winners either are or losers either or, in which, similar to what you saw with the permabands, they have to select between 2 different options for the temp ban. So for example, the winner in response to this could temp ban a track, but it would be winners either or, and or either or. So here's an interesting setup. So the loser would get to pick one pod temp ban, but they only have 3 to use, and then say the winner can pick between 2 track temp bans or 1 condition temp ban, and then you could even limit that as well and say, okay, this is a little too overpowered, so maybe they only get to use 1. So just to take a peek at some other options here. So we always have this chance cube option, which is similar to that first track option you saw, where basically each player gets to call red or blue, and then the winner of that chance cube gets to make this ban, or it's just random. No one gets to pick. Botto essentially just randomizes it. Next, let's get into the track selection options. So loser's pick is how we've always done it, but you could also do winner's pick and our chance cube pick in random, as we always have. But you could also limit it here, like say, get Baru Coast out of there, get Doug Derby out of there. It's up to you to sort of mess with it. Next is the repeat tracks option. So this, we always have a salty run back, but one year we accidentally had a saltier run back option, where players can run back a salty run back, but now I've added a saltiest run back, where you can run back a run back of a run back. So that might get a little hectic there. So yeah, let's go ahead and select it. And then we have these repeat options. So we typically do what I'm calling a soft repeat, which is where you can have different conditions than the original use of that track. But here I've added where you can actually specify, okay, maybe you have to use the same conditions as the first use of the track. So for instance, if your opponent took you to Abyss Skips and you lost, but you want to run it back, this would only allow you to redo Abyss Skips. It wouldn't let you suddenly go back to a full track or change it to no upgrades or anything. So that's what that means. And then default repeat just means whatever you have specified up here is what all repeat tracks must use. And then this is how many uses they get per match. Next is conditions, which we've known as forces. So here's pretty much the same options we know. So we're used to having the loser pick this. And here we can say, how many they get to use per race. This year, we allowed you to stack them. And there would only ever be 5 total. But I've also added some options here for how you could limit it by match. I think in the best of 9, we had 3. We upped it to 3 this year. But I also added this option where you could earn 1 per win or earn 1 per loss, which I think would be kind of interesting to implement. And then finally, we have the options that are available for this condition. So you could force 5 laps. You could force mirrored, which I know is kind of controversial. You could force the pod, so you get to actually choose the pod in that condition. So you could get really interesting with these options. Not that you would want to, but who knows? That's the whole point of this, is to kind of experiment and test the limits of what could be possible within a match, and what kind of strategy could be at play. Finally, let's look at pod selection. Player's pick is what we're used to, where each player gets to pick their own pod, and then we could filter out the options that are available to them. For instance, you could just cross out Ben as an option for the entire match, or for this entire rule set. So at no point does anyone get to choose Ben, and that might make things more interesting or more boring. Who knows? We also have these other options for the method. So for example, maybe the loser gets to pick the pod for both players, or the winner gets to pick, or the chance cube, or the winner of the chance cube, or it's randomly assigned, but it's the same pod for both players, or it's 2 different random pods from the same tier, or it's just 2 completely different random pods. And then we have limited choice, like what this would be with no Ben, but you could even take out a whole bunch of these guys and really limit what's available. And then a random limited choice would be interesting, where Botto goes through and randomizes what options are available instead of you doing it. So you could say, okay, they have 3 choices, and this is randomized every race. And then you could even filter out what is being randomized from. So this would just randomize from all the pods, but you could also take out some options here. And then we also have a pod pool option, which we saw before in our 1v all, where you limit the number of uses that each player gets to use each pod. So you could actually go 2 uses per pod, and then Botto would sort of keep track of this along the way, and would let you know what pods are available to use or unavailable to use. And then you have all the perma bans and the temp bans, but that's basically the point, is for Botto to keep track of all these insane options along the way, and so that way the player's always informed and always able to keep track of what is available and unavailable. So that's really the whole point of this whole thing. And then the track favorite option. So yeah, that's basically it. That was the tour of the 1v1 rule set, which as you can see now is pretty insane in how many options are available, and just how much damage you can do to a player's psyche with all these different options. But yeah, I hope you guys will give it a spin and sort of explore what's available, and please give me feedback on what you think, what changes you think should be made, or what I can do to make this better, and what options could be added, or what options should be removed. So I should clarify that the tourney admins will always have final say on what gets to be played during a match, but it would be interesting to see maybe an option for if players agree upon the use of a different rule set in a match, that could be interesting to see. But we want to avoid confusing spectators and commentators alike, and just trying to keep things somewhat sane. But really, the purpose of this tool is to allow a space where you can experiment and practice these different crazy rule sets outside of an official setting and sort of see what's possible and what you might like to see in an official tournament. That's all this is. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you get some good use out of this tool, and I can't wait to see what kind of crazy rule sets you guys come up with.